What's one truth you wish you'd said out loud when you were younger?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? In the very first 24 hours after I stopped being the quiet wallet in the background, the entire family system they thought was solid came crashing down, and it happened faster than even I expected. For one full year, every single week without fail, I sent my parents $600. At first, it was supposed to be temporary, a bridge while they dealt with some bills that had piled up after my dad's work slowed, and my mom insisted they had to help my brother Mark get on his feet. I told myself I could manage it, that I had a stable job, that it would be easier to just help than to listen to the endless calls about how the lights might get shut off. But temporary has a funny way of turning into permanent when people get comfortable. A month became 3, then 6, then 12, and soon I realized I was the only person in the family actually keeping track of the pattern. What made it worse was how invisible it all became. The transfers were acknowledged only in the most casual way, like, "Oh, thank you, honey, we'll square it later," or "We'll make sure to treat you when we're back on our feet." But there was no actual timeline, no real plan, just me quietly adjusting my own life so I could make sure theirs didn't fall apart. Every Friday morning, the money left my account, and by the time I saw my parents on Sunday, it was as if it never existed. They would sit at the table bragging about Mark's new business idea or my sister Emily's latest course, talking about how proud they were, how bright their futures looked, while the person who was literally underwriting all of it, me, sat in the corner and listened. I want you to picture how that feels. You are in your 30s, working long hours, saving for your own place, constantly saying no to small luxuries because you are bleeding $600 a week to people who treat it like background noise. I told myself I was being a good daughter, that family sticks together, that maybe someday they would look back and realize how much I carried. But deep down I knew that if I stopped, they wouldn't say thank you, they would just panic. They had built their routine on the assumption that I would always come through. When my mom first mentioned the family vacation, I thought maybe this was it, the chance they would finally recognize me. She talked about how everyone needed to relax, how it would be good for the kids to reconnect, how Dad deserved a break. She listed names: Mark, his girlfriend, Emily, even one of Emily's friends who was basically family now. But then she looked at me and said, "We think you should stay home this time. You've been working so much, and honestly, you're always so stressed. This will give you a chance to recharge." I sat there, frozen, realizing she had just planned an entire family getaway with my money quietly running in the background, and I wasn't even considered part of the group. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I didn't list out the thousands I had already given. I just said one word: got it. And in that moment, something shifted in me. If they thought I was going to keep bankrolling their lives while they excluded me from the very events my money made possible, they were about to find out exactly how much they depended on me. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I had been keeping. Every transfer, every memo line, every confirmation email, every travel booking I had set up in the past, all of it was there, neatly filed. You see, what they didn't realize was that all those family perks they bragged about on past trips, early check-in, free upgrades, waived fees, were never just luck. They were mine. My credit card had been the one tied to the reservations. My loyalty accounts had been the reason their rooms got priority. They thought the world just rolled out the red carpet for them, but really, it was me quietly pulling strings. So the first step was simple. I logged into the hotel portal for the upcoming trip, pulled up the reservation that was still showing my loyalty number, and I changed it. I stripped away my card from the guarantee. No more automatic incidentals, no more seamless check-in, no more upgrades. The booking was still there, yes, but the safety net they relied on vanished with one click. I even confirmed with the hotel. "The reservation is now room only, correct? No card on file." The clerk replied, "Correct." I thanked them and hung up. I stared at the screen for a while, feeling something I hadn't felt in months: calm. For the first time, I wasn't panicking about how to make their lives easier. I was letting them experience the exact weight of the choices they had made. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to fight, I just needed to stop being the invisible foundation under their feet. The next morning, the group chat lit up with excited messages about packing, about flights, about how Emily couldn't wait to post from the pool. Not one message mentioned me. Not one person said, "It feels wrong that Jenna isn't coming." I watched the notifications roll in, silent, and then I closed the app. Because what they didn't know, and what I was finally ready to let them learn, was that when the plane landed and they walked into that lobby with their heads full of vacation plans, the hotel was going to look at them and say, "We need a card to proceed." And as I shut my laptop, I whispered to myself, "They land tomorrow." By the time their flight took off and the group chat started flooding with photos of plastic cups and forced smiles, I had already done the quiet work that never makes it into family stories because it is not flashy, it is not sentimental, and it is not the kind of thing anyone thanks you for, yet it is exactly the kind of thing that decides whether a day goes smoothly or whether it spirals into a series of small humiliations that finally add up to a lesson. And I was very comfortable letting the lesson arrive without me standing there to explain it. While they posted the same jokes they always post, I logged into the accounts that I had created to make their lives easier, and I began turning off every invisible privilege that depended on me. Starting with the rental car profile that had my corporate fast-track status attached to it, a detail no one remembers because they do not have to remember it as long as I keep the switch on, I removed my card, revoked the skip-the-line access, and left them with the regular queue like everyone else, because if they are going to treat me like an optional accessory, they can also experience travel without the accessories they never earned. I moved on to the travel insurance add-on that I used to attach by habit whenever they booked anything larger than a day trip, not because they ever asked, but because I had lived through the phone calls where a minor delay becomes a drama and a drama becomes a bill. And then somehow that bill becomes my responsibility, so I disabled the automatic coverage and left the record clear, which means that if baggage goes missing or a connection is missed, the conversation that follows will no longer begin with my name. I checked the airport lounge day passes that were still linked through my account from a previous emergency when my dad had a long layover and acted as though the free sandwiches were a divine right, and I severed that connection as well, not out of cruelty, but because boundary setting without enforcement is just a speech you give yourself, and I had promised myself there would be no more speeches, only actions that leave a paper trail. The group chat, meanwhile, was alive with the kind of small, braggy optimism people perform when they assume everything is handled, with Mark announcing that he had got this on the rental and Emily posting a screenshot of the hotel lobby like she had built it herself, and I watched all of it with a calm that surprised me, because a few months ago I would have jumped in with one more suggestion or one more tiny rescue. Yet now I could read each message like a weather report that predicted exactly what was coming next. Before closing the app, I sent my mother a single line that did not carry sarcasm or anger, just clarity. "Please confirm you have a card for incidentals," and I put the phone face down and let the minutes pass with no reply, which told me everything I needed to know about how this day would go. When their plane landed and the predictable flood of "we made it" updates hit the thread, I was already on my banking page confirming that the standing Friday transfer, the one that had left my account every week for 1 full year, was terminated and archived, not paused, not delayed, not held for review, but ended. And in its place I set a new automatic transfer to a separate savings account that I named in plain language, so there would be no confusion about where my effort belonged from now on, because it is astonishing how different life feels when you finally pay yourself first. With that done, I opened the hotel email I had forwarded to my personal folder, the one that had changed from "guaranteed with card on file" to "card required at check-in," and I read it like a postcard from a future where I was not the family's emergency exit. They reached the lobby in a wave of bright confidence that lasted exactly as long as it took the front desk to ask for a card and to explain that the reservation no longer carried incidentals. And the first sign that the reality had landed was the voicemail that arrived from my dad with a tone I know by heart, half diplomacy and half demand, where he starts soft because he thinks he can still negotiate and then tightens when he realizes the person on the other end is not moving, a tone I used to submit to because it made me feel like a bad daughter if I did not fix the problem right then and there, and I let the voicemail play out without picking up because the person who taught them I would always fix it was me. And the person who gets to teach them another way is also me. Hey kiddo, we are at the desk and there seems to be a mix-up with the card. They say it is not on file anymore. I told them you usually handle this, so if you could just call them or send whatever you did last time, we would really appreciate it. We're holding up the line here, he said in that careful register that treats my labor like a magic trick rather than a set of systems that I built and paid for, and he paused long enough to add, we will pay you back when we get back, you know that. Which would have been almost funny if it were not so familiar, because I have heard those exact words in so many versions that I could recite them backward. I listened to the entire message once, then again, not because I needed to be convinced, but because I wanted to hear my own silence in the space where I used to jump, and when the little icon stopped blinking, I put the phone down and let the lobby do its job, which is to treat adults like adults and to move on to the next guest if you are not ready. Mark texted a few minutes later with a tone that skipped straight past diplomacy to accusation, asking what I had done and why I was messing with the reservation, as though my year of weekly support were a rumor and his entitlement were law. And I typed a reply that I did not send, because explaining myself to someone who has never once asked how the bills get paid is a game I am retired from, so I simply forwarded the hotel's sentence in neutral language, card required at check-in, and left it. They're like a mirror he could choose to look into or not. The messages kept coming, piled on top of each other in shorter and sharper bursts, and I let them pile, because lessons do not land when you break them into small, gentle portions that people can ignore. They land when the world hands you the bill in front of other people and asks, very calmly, how you would like to handle it. They shifted, as they always do, from confidence to confusion and then to urgency, and when my mother finally wrote that the front desk refused early check-in without a valid card and could we just use mine one last time, I took a breath that did not shake. And I wrote a line that was as clean as I could make it. I am not on this trip. Please add your own card, and the second I hit send, their typing bubbles froze, not because I had said something cruel, but because I had said something true. The phone rang again with my dad's name flashing across the screen and the sound of the lobby behind him, and I let it ring all the way through, not to punish him, but to let the moment be what it was always going to be without me covering it. Which is the moment a family learns that privilege is not a personality trait and that doors open for the card on file, not for the loudest voice in the room, and while the call died out, I opened my laptop to the folder labeled everything and clicked on the document that would make the next part crystal clear. Then I waited, because the next words needed to come from them. By the time the second voicemail ended and the third call started to blink on my screen, I had already opened the folder that I jokingly called everything, even though there was nothing funny about the way it had been built. Because every time I sent a weekly transfer, I saved the confirmation. Every time I covered a bill, I wrote a memo line that said exactly what it was for. And every time I booked something that required a card, I kept the email in a subfolder with the subject cleaned up so I could search it without thinking, which meant that in the span of one long breath I could pull up a year of facts that had never once been acknowledged in any family conversation, facts that did not yell, did not guilt, and did not care about whose voice carried the room. Because facts do not need energy to stand, they just need daylight. I scrolled through rows that read like the quiet diary of a person who has been both generous and invisible, with entries labeled house support, utilities hold, emergency dentist, rent gap, and a final column that noted whether the transfer had been described, at the time it was sent, as a gift or a loan, and since I had learned early that words vanish when people are uncomfortable, I had written the word loan into the memo before I hit send every single week, not to weaponize it later, but to keep the truth from evaporating under the warmth of a family lunch where nobody remembers the price of anything. I exported the sheet into a tidy document that anyone could read without needing to decode my system. Converted it into a friendly file with clear totals and dates written in words rather than numbers, so there would be no misunderstanding during narration or later excuses about confusion. And then I attached a simple agreement on the last page that I had drafted months ago and never used. a one-page plan with zero interest, a fair repayment schedule that begins after the trip, and a clause that states in calm language that I do not book, front, or guarantee travel for any adult from this day forward, not because I am cold, but because I am not a card on legs and I am not an institution that operates on feelings. I read it through twice, softened one line that felt stronger than it needed to be, and then I sent it to my parents' shared email with a short message that would survive screenshotting without making me look bitter. Here is the support log from the last year and a simple plan. To settle it without pressure or interest, please review and acknowledge. I will not be available to serve as the payment method for this trip since I am not attending. Thank you for understanding. The reply did not arrive, obviously, because emails do not get answered when people are standing at a desk trying to convince a stranger that they are special. And while I waited, I called the hotel on my own line, reached a patient agent who, to their credit, had no stake in our dynamics and no desire to make anything harder than it needed to be, and I asked them to detach my loyalty number from the reservation because it belonged to me and only to me, and the agent confirmed that once removed, the booking would revert to a standard rate without early check-in privileges or breakfast credits or late checkout, which meant that the small, unearned luxuries that had floated my parents through past trips would no longer be available as a passive birthright. And hearing the confirmation felt like placing a final puzzle piece that had always been sitting under my palm. The agent asked politely if I wanted to cancel the rooms entirely, and I said no, because I am not trying to strand anyone or draw blood. I am trying to teach cause and effect using the language of adults, which is policy, record, and payment. A new message hit my screen while I was still on the call, this time a group text from Mark that carried that steroidal mix of panic and pride injured, insisting that the desk would not let them check in and demanding to know what I had done. As if the building were a petty ant and not a business with standards, and instead of responding to him, I sent a single new email to the hotel from the same thread where they had just confirmed the changes, requesting that any further communication about the booking be directed to the guest listed on arrival, because I am not present and not authorized to manage this stay, which effectively closed the back door they were used to running through whenever charm or noise failed. When my phone lit up again, it was my mother this time, not with a call but with a text that said, "Please just help us get through today, and we will talk about everything when we get back." A line that I have heard in different outfits since high school, a line that sounds reasonable because it promises the future while eating the present, and I answered with something I had practiced in my head but had never actually said out loud. I am available to talk now, and the terms are in your email. Once you acknowledge the plan and add your own card, the hotel will release the keys immediately. There was a pause that carried across the tiny bubbles like a held breath, and during that stillness I opened my banking app and confirmed, for the sake of my own spine, that the weekly transfer rule was indeed gone and that the new automatic deposit to the account I had named after myself was active for the next Friday, and I sat with the small strangeness of paying myself in the same rhythmic way I used to pay the family. A feeling that was not triumphant so much as deeply sane. Another text arrived from Emily, shorter and more human than the others, saying that she knew I had covered more than anyone admitted and that she would sign anything if it meant avoiding a public scene. Which told me that at least one person in that lobby understood that there are consequences for calling someone an optional accessory while using the door they purchased. I wrote back that I would send signature links to everyone, because this is not about singled-out blame but about adults putting ink on what used to be air, and then I used my document tool to generate individual signature requests that would timestamp acceptance and send a receipt to all parties. When I hit send, my dad's name appeared again on the screen with a voice call that I finally answered, not because I was softening, but because the conditions were now visible and it was time to speak into them. The lobby noise was a hum behind him, the sort of sound that usually makes me rush, and I chose not to rush, explaining in measured words that this is not punishment, it is policy. That I have redesigned my relationship to the family to match the level of respect that has been shown in return, and that once the signatures were registered they could add their own card and proceed like any other guests, which seemed to stun him more than anger him. Because there is nothing to push against when the rules do not wobble. He tried one last angle, suggesting that this was not the day for paperwork, and I said, with all the patience I had saved by not picking up earlier, that today is exactly the day for paperwork because I am not in the habit of sending people into the world without a way to stand, and the way to stand is for everyone to carry their own weight. A moment later, the signature notifications started to roll in, not all at once and not without a few half-hearted protests in the group chat, but enough to form a straight line through a year of blurred boundaries. And after the last one arrived, I forwarded the hotel a direct link that allowed guests to add a credit card securely without me as an intermediary. And then I sent the same link to the family thread with one clear sentence: please add your own card now. Once the hold is placed, the keys are yours. I watched the 3 dots rise and fall as they fumbled with the process, and for the first time in a long time, I did not feel like I was abandoning anyone. I felt like I was returning the responsibility to the people who had dropped it at my feet and walked away. When the confirmation finally came through from the hotel that a new card had been added and the rooms were released, Mark fired off a last jab about how this was dramatic and unnecessary, which barely grazed me. Because the only drama in the room had been the shock of a system operating without its favorite ghost, and I closed the laptop after sending one final message that needed no decoration and offered no apology. A message that would carry cleanly into the next hour whether they liked it or not. Read the email. When I finally let the phone ring through without touching it, I knew the balance had shifted completely, because for the first time in years they were standing in public with the weight of their choices fully visible. And the difference between me caving and me holding my ground was the difference between slipping them another invisible bailout or letting the lobby deliver a lesson that would echo far longer than my voice ever could. The lobby is not sentimental, it does not bend to guilt, and it does not soften when someone raises their voice. It simply asks for what is due, and if you cannot produce it, it turns to the next person in line. I had hidden them from that reality for too long, thinking I was protecting them, but in truth I had only been protecting my own role as the dependable fixer, the one who swallows pride while everyone else practices entitlement. That role no longer existed, and the silence on their end was proof they were beginning to realize it. I answered eventually, because there is no point in avoiding forever, and when I did, my father's voice came through clipped and urgent, with the unmistakable shuffle of travelers being pushed aside for the next guest. He started with a half-hearted attempt at diplomacy, telling me this was a misunderstanding and that the staff must be confused, and then he shifted into frustration, insisting that I knew how to solve it, and that all I needed to do was put my card back on file the way I had always done. I waited until he finished the cycle, then I spoke with a steadiness I had rehearsed in my head for months, telling him that this was not confusion at all, it was the real world operating exactly as it should, and that for a year I had kept them buffered from it while draining myself dry. I told him plainly that there would be no more invisible safety net, and that if they wanted the keys in their hands, they would need to acknowledge the repayment plan I had emailed, sign it, and then add their own card like every other adult. The silence that followed was not the comfortable kind, it was the kind that burns, the kind where someone realizes that the words they always leaned on no longer open the same doors. My mother finally jumped in, her voice full of that familiar edge of guilt, telling me this was family and that family does not keep receipts or make one another sign papers. But I reminded her that I had given them 12 months of faith without a single condition, and that they had thanked me by excluding me from the very trip my money had made possible. I said that family first cannot mean I am always last, and that love without boundaries is just dependency dressed in softer words. There was more scrambling, more appeals, more attempts at sidestepping the issue, but I refused to get dragged into a debate about feelings when the matter was as simple as action. Sign, add a card, and move forward. Emily's text appeared again in the group chat, quieter this time, saying that she was ready to sign because she was tired of the scene, and I could almost hear the ripple it caused on their end, because once one person accepts the terms, everyone else looks smaller for refusing. Mark held out longer, sending bursts of messages accusing me of being dramatic, selfish, and cold, and I read them without emotion. Because anyone who has never once contributed to the support has very little credibility calling me selfish for refusing to continue being drained. I sat there in my apartment, not pacing, not panicking, just letting the process unfold, and when the first digital signature pinged into my inbox, I felt a kind of release that no apology could have given me. One by one they came through, Emily first, then eventually my father, who finally realized that digging in his heels would only strand them further. My mother followed, and at last, Mark, whose signature carried the reluctant weight of someone who knows the game is up but cannot admit defeat out loud. With each ping, I felt years of quiet resentment ease into something cleaner, not forgiveness exactly, but clarity. Once all the names were in place, I activated the final step I had been holding back until this exact moment. I logged into my bank and permanently deleted the recurring transfer rule that had once tied me to their account like an invisible leash. In its place, I increased the automatic deposit into the savings account I had named Future Jenna, doubling the amount I had been giving them, because the truth was I had already learned to live without that money. And now it was time to see what it felt like when it was finally building something for me instead of patching over their irresponsibility. The satisfaction of seeing that new transfer scheduled was sharper than any revenge speech I could have given. It was the quiet triumph of knowing I had redirected the flow of my own energy back where it belonged. The next message I sent to the group was short, almost bureaucratic in tone. Now that the agreement is signed, please add your own card to the reservation. The hotel will release the keys immediately once the hold is placed. I attached the secure link, closed my laptop, and left the rest in their hands. Within minutes, the hotel confirmed that a new card had been added, and the room keys were released. I could picture them walking back to the desk with their heads down, sliding their card across the counter, realizing that for the first time in a long time they were not being escorted into comfort on my shoulders, but standing on their own, shaky but upright. That night, while they finally unpacked in silence, I cooked myself dinner and sat with the thought that the worst part of the last year had not been the money, though $600 a week is not nothing, but the way it erased me, turning me into a ghost who paid bills while my parents praised other people's accomplishments. Pulling back was not just about finances, it was about refusing to be erased any longer. When my phone buzzed one last time with a quiet message from Emily saying thank you and that she was sorry for how it had played out, I realized that not everyone would remain blind, and that was enough. I did not need them to collapse in apologies. I only needed them to learn that every system has limits, and I had finally found mine. As I turned off the lights, I thought about the phrase my dad had always used whenever money was tight, "We'll figure it out," and I realized that maybe for the first time in decades, they actually would have to figure it out, without me as their invisible safety valve. The transfer was gone. The signatures were in place, the rules were written, and I had finally shifted the ground. From here on out, the responsibility was theirs, and I would never again be the card on file for a family that treated me like a placeholder. And that realization, more than any confrontation, was the real revenge. When the video call finally connected that evening, their faces appeared in a tight grid, each of them holding back words they wanted to throw but no longer trusted to land, and I could see in their posture that the day had been long, humiliating, and heavier than anything they had expected when they boarded the plane full of laughter that morning. My father started to speak first, trying to frame the entire ordeal as a simple mix-up that had grown out of proportion, but I cut in before he could spin it into something harmless, telling him calmly that nothing about this was a mistake, that every obstacle they had hit that day was simply the absence of my quiet work, and that the only thing out of proportion had been the one-sided arrangement we had all pretended was normal. I explained, not with anger but with precision, that for 1 year I had carried their weight in silence, transferring $600 every single week, fronting cards, attaching my name to reservations, covering emergencies, and never once being treated as an equal member of the family, let alone as someone whose efforts deserved respect. I pulled up my screen share, not to overwhelm them with documents, but to show them exactly what they had signed earlier: the repayment schedule, the clause about boundaries, the acknowledgement that my support had always been a loan and never a gift, and the rule that from this day forward I am not a guarantor for anyone's comfort but my own. My mother's face tightened, and she tried to interrupt, saying that it felt cruel to turn family into contracts, but I reminded her that the absence of written rules had turned me into a bottomless resource, and that this was not cruelty, but clarity. I said, in words that I had rehearsed, but never believed I would say out loud, that family only works when everyone understands the limits of what can be asked, and that I had reached the absolute end of mine. Mark, who had been simmering all day, finally spoke, accusing me of humiliating them, of turning a simple vacation into a spectacle, and of undermining their dignity in front of strangers. I let him finish. Then I asked him directly how much he had contributed to the household over the last year, how many of the bills he had covered, how many of the emergencies he had stepped in to resolve. He looked away, and when he said nothing, I told him that humiliation only stings when it reveals something true, and the truth is that for 12 months he had lived as though someone else's wallet was a permanent extension of his own ambition. Emily broke the silence then, her voice quieter but steadier than it had been in the group chat, admitting that she had known more than she had let on, that she had suspected I was doing more than anyone acknowledged, and that she signed the plan because she realized it was time to stop pretending that I could carry everything without cost. That admission, even though it was small, felt like the first real sign of honesty I had heard in years. I forwarded the secure link from the hotel system into the call chat and told them plainly that the only thing standing between them and their keys was their own card, and that once it was entered, the staff would treat them like any other guests. There was no shouting, no threats, no emotional blackmail that could change that reality, because hotels do not negotiate with guilt, and neither did I anymore. My father sighed, pulled out his wallet on camera, and began typing, and within minutes an email arrived confirming that the hold had been placed and the rooms were available. I said nothing dramatic in that moment. I just nodded and closed the screen share, because the real victory was not in rubbing it in, but in watching them learn, finally, that access comes with responsibility. After the silence stretched longer than anyone liked, I told them there was one more matter I needed to finalize, and I pulled up the corporate travel portal where all of their past perks had been quietly linked to my accounts. I showed them the profile that had once included their names under my benefits, and I removed them one by one, explaining as I did it that from now on, the loyalty points, the upgrades, the insurance, and the status belonged only to me. Because I had earned them and maintained them, and they were never supposed to be treated as an inherited privilege. My mother started to protest again, but I kept going, telling them that this was not about punishment but about fairness. Because adults who want comfort should secure it themselves rather than expecting it to arrive from someone they excluded without hesitation. When the last profile was cleared, I closed the window and sat back, feeling a sense of completion that no apology could have matched. I told them I was not angry anymore, that I did not want endless debates about gratitude or guilt, that I simply wanted to live without the constant drain of being treated like a service line. I said that I wished them well, that I hoped they enjoyed the rest of their trip, and that I would see them when they returned if they were ready to treat me as an equal, not as a backup plan. My father muttered something about figuring it out. My mother avoided eye contact. Mark shook his head, and Emily whispered thank you, which was enough for me. That night, after the call ended, I sat alone in my apartment and realized that I had finally shifted the ground under all of us. They had their vacation, but they had to pay for it themselves, and they had signed a plan that acknowledged the truth I had been carrying for too long. I had my freedom, not just from the weekly transfer but from the invisible contract that had told me my worth came from what I could provide. The revenge had never been about ruining their trip. It had been about reclaiming my place in the story of my own life. As I shut down the computer, I thought of one last line, the kind of question that echoes in your head long after the conversation is over. Do you know your true worth? Mine turned out not to be measured in dollars or in how smoothly I could cover for everyone else, but in the moment I stopped paying for the privilege of being ignored, and forced them to see me not as a card on file, but as a person who had finally learned to choose herself.